and it's 7:45 in the morning, doing all right, having the day begin with a wonderful podcast.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
What you been up to?
Well, nothing out of the ordinary. Working on a couple of different writing projects, and then day-to-day life, doing my best not to pay too much attention to the horrible, horrible news situation in America, because there's really nothing you can do about it. So, trying not to
just
obsess
wear your
too much
mask
about that.
and sanitize your hands, friends.
Sure, do that.
The lockdowns are coming. That's my prediction.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving until about January 15th.
Well, and then the responses to the lockdown are coming too, which is going to be just horrendous. Like, I don't know. This year is rough.
To say the least.
I mean, whatever. It's not an original observation, but it deserves to be observed. There we are.
Yeah. When things blow up, I'm sure we'll have things to say about it. Until then, I'm just holding my breath.
Yeah. When things blow up and we're doing this podcast into rocks in the middle of an irradiated hole, that'll be fun. Anyway, on that happy note, let's talk about the first of our subjects here today. We're talking about Aunty Donna's Big Ol' House of Fun.
Aunty Donna. Okay.
So what is that?
So it's a Netflix show focused on the work of a group that's been around a while, like years and years. It's a what would you call it? It's a comedy troupe.
Show.
Yeah, well, the show is a sketch show. The troupe is a comedy troupe slash kind of band slash musical group. A lot of their stuff has music, we'll talk about it. But
and they're Australian too.
They are from that continent. And so I didn't know anything about it. I've not heard of these people before in my life. And I was poking around on Netflix the other night looking for things, and Netflix suggested that I tune in. And so I did. And it was a shocking experience.
What was shocking about it?
So it's a comedy show. I watch a lot of comedy. I watch a lot of stand-up. I try to stay up on SNL, and this is weirder than all of that. It feels on some level like a sketch show that you would catch on Comedy Central, like a Chappelle show or something like that. But this is different and weirder, and certainly more absurd. And it's not. I wouldn't say it's grounded in reality. It's another style. I mean, it's nominally based in somewhat realistic scenarios, but then about every 30 seconds it blows up into something totally absurd. Just totally absurd. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely an absurdist kind of comedy. I feel like there's a number of different sort of antecedents and some sort of categorizations that it falls into. Broadly speaking, I think that the fact that it comes from Australia is, first of all, of some note. It bears some similarities to another comedy sort of group or thing from that part of the world, though not Australia specifically. That's Flight of the Conchords from New Zealand. It feels in keeping with them to a certain degree. Like, the music, as you mentioned, that is a similarity. Also, the sort of absurdism of it all is in keeping with that as well as a similarity, though this really ramps that up a lot. As far as the absurdist stuff goes, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. It's going to happen. No, it's not. Oh, that was weird. Never mind. Anyway, as far as like the absurdism goes, I feel like that's really of a piece with it verges almost into anti-comedy sometimes, like and the extremity of the absurdism, along with almost a sort of hostility is not the right word, but it it goes to a place where it's almost unpleasant sometimes, and that's again in keeping with a certain comedic tone, like not quite to Tim and Eric lengths, but definitely is in keeping with like Comedy Bang Bang, just Scott Aukerman's podcast that turned into a talk show on IFC, or a parody of talk show. And Scott Aukerman is in fact a producer on Aunty Donna's big old house of fun. And if you're familiar with his show at all, there's a thing that they do, where it's like the introduction of a premise, and then you take it to its absurdist sort of extreme, heightening it, and really break reality in a way that's almost meta, where there's this, you have sort of self-consciously taken everything past a point of being believable, and yet they don't break character, and that's a tricky place to be comedically, but they pull it off really well. It's very funny, and they're a winning group. As you say, they've been around for a while, so they have that kind of good dynamic that's clearly been established over many hours of stage time, one would assume.
Yeah,
Right?
so some of the things that stand out to me for this, so it feels theatrical. The characters are big and broad, which you would expect, but also they're making some interesting stagecraft choices that do go meta from time to time, like they break the equivalent of the fourth wall of the screen multiple times. They're doing things that I have seen done on stage. Like there are three of these actors, and occasionally they have guests join them. But the
actors' names are Mark Samuel Bonanno, Broden Kelly, and Zachary Ruane.
Yeah, and they what's pretty impressive is that they keep the constraints on those three most of the time. So if they have a sketch that they write for 4 people or 5 people or 6 people, it usually only takes the 3 of them to pull it off. Now, occasionally they have guests. Ed Helms is a producer on the show, and he's appeared. Professional wrestler character appeared. And they have occasional extras. But most of the principal acting is those 3. And so when they need a 4th, like in one of the sketches I watched last night, they pop the actor over into another character and like make the original character a mannequin, which I think is genius, and an example of like a theatrical choice that I would have seen sort of in the Shakespeare original practices cirque style,
Well, and also, and there's again a very sort of meta thing happening there where they're acknowledging the jankiness of it. I mean, the show really does roll on its constant sort of surprising from moment to moment. There's always some new way that they heighten things, or some way that they're undermining the premise in some basic way, and there's a very stream of consciousness sort of aspect to the whole thing that they manage to keep it moving, and they keep the ball up in the air. And that's really the trick with something like this, right? You can't, if the energy drops, or that sort of sense of sort of ingenuity, or newness, whatever, flags, then the whole thing could fall apart. But that doesn't happen.
No, it's we've talked about this before. I mean, and this was drilled into me, at least on the directing side in graduate schools. stay ahead of your audience. That's the number one secret. And
Mm-hmm.
even good TV shows, good movies, do not do this. They lull whatever. So, and it particularly can be challenging on the comedy side because once you establish your bag of tricks, as a writer, as a director, as an actor, it's sort of done. And so the masters do it by having interesting content, like maintaining interesting content throughout. This one's really interesting because it does it in content. Sure, it's that absurdist, like this is going in a different direction every 45 seconds in a way that sort of pulls you in. But it's also doing it in terms of form, and by that I mean like it's these sketches are structured intentionally to sort of, as you say, it's a stream of consciousness thing, but it's turning the corner. That's the comedy term, right? It's turning the corner all the time. It's these sharp turns, and you are the audience, the watcher, the viewer are left to catch up. And what I think is really great about it is like it'll have a good idea, right? It's a lot of these episodes open with a song or something, and you are say a minute 45 or 2.5 minutes into this song, and it cuts it. It changes. It's a complete change of direction. Leaves you wanting more of the song, or leaves you wanting the old hook, but it doesn't give it to you. It just plows right ahead.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the other things that's interesting about the show is that there is, as absurdist and freeform as it is, each episode does actually sort of have a central idea or theme that it's picking at that it keeps coming back to. Like the first one is about how, and this gives you some sense of the absurdity of the show, which should tell you if it's for you or not. They get angry at the three of them live together in a house theoretically, and they get angry at their fourth roommate, who is their dishwasher, who has started speaking to them for the first time and demanding that they pay her, voiced by Kristen Schaal. And they get so angry at her that they put her out on the street and need to find a fourth roommate. And so that's nominally what the show is, what that episode is centered around, them having to find a new roommate to replace their dishwasher, who they hate now. And and all of the people who they're interviewing are ridiculous and, crazy, and also played by the three core actors as well. So, there's no attempt to, and in that there's a subversion of narrative in sitcoms. It's like this extreme parody of a sitcom in some ways, at least in that episode. And then, while constantly pointing to and recognizing how they're undermining the thing. A person's tolerance for that kind of thing is going to vary, and there are moments when you may not be in the mood for it, but their energy is so high is the thing. Like then the sort of innovations that they come up with from moment to moment are constantly very surprising and funny. So it all works quite well. It has a lot. It reminds me of again, like a lot in common with the thing that separates it from Flight of the Conchords particularly is an energy that's very similar to sort of American weird comedy and comedy out of sort of the improv communities in America. Scott Ackerman's Comedy Bang Bang is an improv-based show, and he brings in a lot of his sort of regular players from that show to be in this. But it also reminds me a lot of, say, Tim Robinson's I Think You Should Leave. Have you seen that show, Jeremy?
I'm putting it on my list right now.
I would do it. It's another sketch comedy show on Netflix from Tim Robinson was for a minute on Saturday Night Live as a cast member, but he was really just too weird for that show. He had been a writer on the show for a couple of years, and then when he was no longer a cast member on that, left and went on to make the show Detroiters, which was a funny show on Comedy Central. But then did for Netflix this thing called The Characters, which was like a sketch-based show that was given to a bunch of different comic performers, where each of them got a half hour. And that was just bananas, his sketch show on that. And I think that was the seed from which I Think You Should Leave grew at Netflix. And it's interesting at Netflix, they really are fostering a very, I think they're trying to compete a little bit with like the Adult Swim kind of comedy over there, which is, again, that kind of aggressive, almost anti-comedic
that's
sensibility.
It reminds me of some of that stuff, particularly the cartoon side. On it's trying to do with human beings what, but some of those more subversive shows are trying to do, but have to do it cartoon wise, right? So,
Sure.
and that's why I say is another sort of source of delight for me in this show is how physical the actors are in their pursuit of the choices. They look trained to me. At least two of the three of them do. Mark and Zach look like have lots of physical training behind them.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too because I can see that the number of different influences on this show is fascinating to me. It also comes out of, it has understandably a very Australian sort of energy to it, and it feels like there's maybe, the Aunty Donna title feels like it's a nod towards like the kind of Australian children's entertainment that I feel like there has been a lot of over the last 10 to 15 years, like the Wiggles and stuff like that. Like there is the sort of faintest suggestion of this being like a children's show in some ways, the presentational nature of the way that they talk to the camera and the songs, but it's like literally it's like the Wiggles took meth, basically, is what this would be. In terms of how insane it gets, and also these turns into really dark corridors, or cul-de-sacs. Not corridors, that'd be a hallway. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, it's a funny show. I would give it a look. And if this sounds, after our description of it, like something you would absolutely hate, then you probably would. But if
I agree with you. It's best in small doses. Two episodes at a time is what I can do. It's a nice little palate cleanser for the day.
Yeah, it's good to dip into. I mean, there is a point where it's sort of, weird, nothing actually matters sort of ethos can become not what you want at a certain point. So you got to be in the right mood for it, I guess.
Also, I would just say it's maybe you want to screen it before your kids see it, and screen it before you watch it with your parents. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
it might make you more uncomfortable with those people in the room.
Yeah, it's not for sensitive audiences, definitely. But otherwise, have at it. Have at it.
Have at it. All right, next we're talking about our NaNoWriMo November Writing Month project.
We are. So we're really checking in here. We're in the middle of writing some things that we're not ready to share with everybody, but figured it was an opportunity to discuss where it is that we are and what we're doing here. For those of you who've been following along, we're or haven't been, perhaps more appropriately, Jeremy and I have been collaborating for a while on a script that is sort of a sequel, or that is in fact a sequel to the Henry IV plays and Henry V. And the show is called Falstaff's Son, and it is based on the premise that Falstaff's page, in who we meet in Henry IV, Part 2, and who goes on to Henry V, is in fact Falstaff's illegitimate son, who, through various machinations, he has gotten raised with a degree of respectability, and is raising now himself for a few years without the child's knowledge that Falstaff is his father, and all with the help of Henry, which is sort of begrudgingly given. And then, so we sort of want to look at the events we're happening. The first half of the show is, anyways, contemporaneous with the events of Henry IV, Part 2, and Henry V, and then we will jump forward in time in Act 2 to look at interactions between Hal, or adult Henry V, and the boy, as they're both older. So that's the long explanation, and we're sort of putting together Act 1 still. Yeah?
We are.
That's what.
Yeah.
Yes.
I took a look at some things this week. I did technically write some stuff.
Yeah, me too, but,
But, it's a busy month. It's been a crazy couple weeks.
Yeah.
I imagine most people go through this.
Yeah, can I just say, NaNoWriMo, making it in November is a perverse idea. It's like the end of the year, and you have like tons of holidays and stuff. Why would that be the month? Do it in March. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
No, that's... Yeah, so tell us more about what scene you're working on, and your thoughts about how you're moving forward.
So the thing that I'm in the middle of right now is the scene where in the play we meet Doll Tearsheet, who in our telling of this is the boy's mother, with Falstaff. And we our premise, the idea is that the boy doesn't know that Falstaff and especially Doll are his parents, but that's a fact that is known by certain other people in that community, and it's sort of the unspoken thing that hangs over a lot of their interactions. And so anyway, the introduction of Doll is an interesting thing. In Henry IV, Part 2, she and Falstaff have, she is a prostitute, but it's clear that she and Falstaff have an affectionate relationship with each other, and are, depending on how you play the scene or read it, in fact, in love. And so we really sort of jumped into that in a big way. And her introduction, I think, it's a tricky thing. You want to be, it needs to be, it's a complicated character, right? And, we want to see the relationship between her and Falstaff. Both of them are of a sort of liberal sensibility when it comes to their sexual favors and willingness to share them with anyone who's taking, but also that they care about each other quite a bit. And she is a person who, through circumstance and living in the times that they're living in, is a victim in many ways. At the end of Henry IV, Part 2, in the original play, she is pregnant. At the end of that, with who would be someone who would be a half brother to our main character, the boy, and not Falstaff's kid. Which is so this gives you some idea of the situation that she finds herself in, and so in this scene, anyways, I'm trying to give a sense of her and Falstaff's sort of on again, off again relationship and the openness of it. And also, it's about the boy seeing the woman who is his mother without knowing it for the first time, which will eventually put together. And then there is an interesting antagonistic relationship that we're developing as well between the boy and Francis. Francis, who is a named character in Henry IV Part 1, who's a servant, an indentured servant at the tavern, working for Mistress Quickly, essentially making him a slave to them. And where in this scene, shortly after the boy's arrival into the group, he's sort of giving him advice and orienting him, but there's a definite sense of resentment for the boy. Like, I think Francis is very unhappy with his life and the situation that he's in, being an indentured servant, which is really a pretty unfair, horrendous, position to occupy. And he sees the boy as, someone in a service position, but who clearly has advantages he doesn't have. The boy comes from a nominally noble background, or respectable in any case, is on a path towards a more respectable place in life, being the page or apprentice to a knight, even though that knight is Falstaff. And so there's some resentment there. And eventually, we want to play with the idea that Francis becomes aware of the boy's actual parentage, and not so subtly at first, and then eventually not so suddenly hints to him and makes fun of him because of that, with the boy sort of not having any sense or context for what's going on. And we want to build to eventually is that getting to a place where Francis is physically threatening to the kid, and threatens also to reveal the secret of his parentage to him. And in the midst of that, a confrontation around that, Falstaff will intervene and, in fact, murder Francis.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. And probably enlist Quickly's help in getting rid of the body and whatnot. So adding a sort of degree of darkness and intrigue into this, and also giving the boy something he can look back on, feeling like, oh, I was saved from, harm by Falstaff, but also having that be a more complicated moment as well. So that's all laying the groundwork for those eventual revelations here. So that's kind of what we're wrestling with right now. So,
and I'm starting to look ahead at one of our first big sort of time geography jumps, heading to France, seeing what that looks like. And the thing I've been thinking a lot about this is is just going back to how Henry V in particular is really adept at that because of the use of the chorus, and that's going to factor into our storytelling later. But one of the things about that play in particular is it sort of permits film and TV writing in a way that some of those other plays don't. That they feel more like plays, and that feels more like a movie. And so one of the things I think that affords us, and it's certainly something I've noticed as I've been digging in, is like we can get away with scenes that would otherwise be too short for theater. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. It definitely does. And it is a weird feature of Henry V, that makes that possible. Not for nothing that there have been, multiple fairly high-profile film adaptations of Henry V over the years when many other history plays have not been treated on film. And also weird that Henry V would be, because it's the third in a trilogy, really. I mean, arguably the fourth if you want to get picky about it. But, the third film about the third story about Hal. And out of context, there are lots of reasons why it kind of doesn't make sense to tell that story by itself. And yet people do that on film frequently. And it's because, I think, of what you're talking about. The chorus character in particular gives you this framing device that is especially filmic and does, yes, give you the ability to dip in and out, which we are using a lot. So it makes this, I think that was part of what attracted us, honestly, to the project, was the idea that we could do something that felt more modern in sensibility because it had been built into the play in this way that was kind of unique. It's not that Henry V is the only play that has a chorus in it, but it gets used a little bit more frequently than Shakespeare does in his other plays, which is interesting. I always go back to sort of thinking of the way that Branagh did it in his Henry V adaptation, where the chorus is dressed in modern dress, right? Like his opening monologue is delivered to camera, walking through a soundstage with, all of the props and, tech stuff around him, and then sort of bursts onto the set or onto the scene at the end of that. And it really does lend itself well to that. And our sort of chorus monologue at the beginning of our thing is a nod or is in conversation with that opening monologue in Henry V in many ways. So yeah, to everything you said, that is an interesting sort of aspect of this. We do jump around in time and space much more easily, or maybe it's not even easier though. It's like the plays always do jump around in space. We're doing it in time in a way that's more ostentatious. But I guess in drawing attention to itself, it feels oddly more, I don't know, modern. It's interesting.
That's how I feel about it. All right. Well, next time we'll have whatever we have.
Yeah.
We are making progress. That feels good.
We are. It is moving forward. So going in the right direction. That's what you want.
All right. It's time for sandwich reviews.
Oh, sandwich reviews.
I think this is the last review of the ones we wrote many moons ago. And so we now actually have to start eating sandwiches again.
Yeah, I kind of caught up there already. You had been more on the ball than me when we left this. And the last two reviews you had finished, and I hadn't, and I'd only gotten like halfway through one of them before we abandoned it for various reasons. And so, anyway, this today represents a somewhat more recent review for me as well, with Chick-fil-A. That's what we're talking about in our chicken category.
All right, here comes my review. My points are as follows: flavor 9, mouthfeel 3, adjoining produce 3, bread 1, meat 1, adjoining sauces and condiments 0, sandwich aesthetic 1, complementary items 3, contextual sleaze 3, appraisal of the cost 3, personalities 9 to the sandwich 3, nature of the sandwiches lingering in the memory -3, for a total of 27 points out of 50. And here's what I have to say about it. Chick-fil-A's politics and mine do not match up. Years ago, when the controversy over the Cathy family's support of anti-LGBTQ plus initiatives and possible bias against queer employees made national news and resulted in a semi-coordinated nationwide boycott and impressive counter-boycott by members of the evangelical Christian communities, I took to the social media to let the evangelicals have it. I called them bigots, which I think they still mostly are, and over the stupidity of creating a culture war over a sandwich. And while I still do not agree with Chick-fil-A's policies, I do think the company recovered from the angst of that cultural moment not only intact, but about as clean smelling as chicken shit could possibly smell. And here's the thing. I don't think their PR speak or crisis management was the thing that did this. Instead, and this is an absolute anomaly in modern American chain food, they did it with product and personality. Of course, the chicken didn't change. It shouldn't have. That chicken is damn good compared to every other competitor on the market. They don't have the powder spray batter like Wendy's and McDonald's. They don't have the gallon of grease of a KFC. In the South, Chick-fil-A's nominal competitor, Zaxby's, has a very good chicken, but it tends to feel heavy, always too much. Chick-fil-A's sandwich is simple. Bun, fresh chicken, hand-battered, pickle. What else do you want? And the waffle fries, despite no longer being cooked in peanut oil, are still delicious, especially when ordered well done. Chick-fil-A has the industry's best selection of sauces, although the McDonald's sweet and sour sauce is the industry's best. And all of them match up with the chicken and fries incredibly well. Chick-fil-A's service is also more than a little remarkable. Unlike virtually every other entry in this competition, Chick-fil-A's service is present and mindful. I am greeted warmly. I am looked in the eye. I am waited on like it's their job. They clear my trash. They wipe the table under me. They offer to refill my beverage. They take care, and not in the absent-minded, hurried, and harried way we've come to expect at every other fast food establishment. And it's here where I think Chick-fil-A has been able to pull off what Chipotle and Papa John's have not and will not soon pull off: transcendence over controversy. I still think Chipotle, disease, and pretension are somewhat synonymous. Papa John's and racism are still synonymous, but Chick-fil-A has somewhat moved on by having a quality product and a quality approach to service. Don't get me wrong, the sandwich is still slathered in guilt. It is just the tasty present kind.
So, just to let everybody know, again, Jeremy and I do not read each other's reviews before we do this. So, interestingly, there is some overlap in our approach to our reviews here and some of our observations. That is entirely natural, I want to tell everybody, and honest. So, here's my breakdown on that. Flavor. I gave it 8 points. Mouthfeel, 4. Adjoining produce, 3. Bread, 3. Meat, 4. Adjoining sauces and condiments, 2. Sandwich aesthetic, 4. Complementary items, 1. Contextual sleaze, 3. Appraisal of the cost, 4. Personalities nigh unto the sandwich, 3. And the nature of the sandwich is lingering in memory, 0, for a total of 39 out of 50 points. So let's address the proverbial elephant in the room. In 2012, journalists wrote about donations from a Chick-fil-A charitable arm revealing that it had given millions of dollars to have a dozen different anti-LGBTQ groups. That position was more central to the missions of some of those organizations than others, but at least one was explicitly devoted to making gay people straight. That group was Exodus, to which Chick-fil-A had given $1,000. People boycotted the company. There was a counter-reaction by Chick-fil-A supporters, and certain politicians announced that the restaurant was not welcome in their areas. In response, Chick-fil-A walked a careful line, not really apologizing, while also not mounting a full-throated defense. But they did announce that they would stop giving money to anti-gay organizations, and this turned out not to be entirely true. They still gave some money to a handful of groups that technically disapprove of homosexuality and gender nonconformity, though none that are specifically focused on those issues. That is up until last year, when the company announced a new focus in their charitable work, with donations going solely to issues of homelessness, education, and hunger, thereby trying to sidestep the issue permanently. But since those issues first came to light, the company has sought to deflect the negative attention as much as possible. And whatever they're doing seems to have been pretty effective, because while Chick-fil-A can still elicit strong responses from politically engaged folks on all sides, most people seem unaware that there's a controversy at all. And since 2012, the chain has not only become more successful, regularly topping popularity rankings of fast food companies in America, while growing ever more wildly profitable, no small feat, as they are operating one day less a week than all their competitors, in religious observance of the Christian Sabbath. So, anyway, we're reviewing it. And there's a question as to how much to factor all that stuff into our assessment. Given the parameters of our ranking system, the answer would appear to be not much, but it seems like something we should acknowledge, and so we have. That's what this is. Anyway, it's a pretty good sandwich. That may sound like faint praise, but it's not nothing. There's an admirable consistency to the quality of the food at Chick-fil-A, and they've really carved out a nice niche for themselves. The national furor surrounding the brand seems like a lot to place on the shoulders of a sandwich that is just pretty good. But it's not the food that makes the brand popular. Or not just the food, in any case. Chick-fil-A is ostentatiously committed to good service, with a regimented Disneyland-style set of rules about cleanliness and friendliness. They pay at above-market wages, and their staff is expected to be smart, fastidious, and helpful. Their restaurants are clean, and their service works with admirable speed and efficiency. It's almost as if the company made a conscious decision to combat their, in some quarters, toxic public perception by being extremely well run and objectively better at customer service than most of their competitors. It's like that kid in a class who's always engaged, articulate, and respectful, who turns in neat, grammatically correct, well-composed essays that seems to subtly, or not so subtly, assert arguments about the supremacy of Western culture, quote unquote, in ways that are extremely discomforting. Anyway, on to my recent trip to Chick-fil-A. Their make the trains run on time ethos was particularly well on display, with a long drive-through line that was being serviced by 2 employees walking from car to car, taking orders remotely. They took my order, a chicken sandwich meal, and a peach milkshake with friendly efficiency. The line moved extremely fast. Payment was taken by yet another remotely mobile employee in the name of keeping the line moving quickly, and I got my food much more speedily than one would have anticipated given the size of the line. I pulled over to eat. The sandwich was delivered in a silver bag that insulated the sandwich and retained moisture, keeping it hot and making the bread soft and pillowy. The heat makes a difference, and combined with the crispy on the outside but still moist chicken, it delivers a better than average experience. I appreciate the lack of condiments and toppings other than a couple of pickles, which shows a sense of confidence about what they're offering. I'm not a fan of the Chick-fil-A waffle fries, but that milkshake was really good, with real ice cream and actual pieces of fruit in it, so points for that. Listen, the pickle juice brined breaded southern chicken sandwich didn't really have a national profile on fast food menus until Chick-fil-A's successful expansion. Now there are several versions of it at Popeyes, KFC, and McDonald's, in addition to or instead of the chicken sandwiches that they used to have. So when you create a category on the national fast food menu, you know you did something. There is a lot that is extremely admirable about the brand, and their food is good, while not being quite great in the way that its most enthusiastic partisans claim. But for all that, it's difficult to shake the uneasy feelings evoked by the franchise's social positions, which is why its lingering in the memory gets a 0 from me. So, we landed in very similar places, actually, with regard to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, when we're talking about customer delight, which is keeps coming up in a lot of our reviews, Chick-fil-A is the industry leader in fast food on customer delight. There are some others in the conversation. Chipotle is in the conversation, but it really angles things in a different way. So both of them are interested in environment. Chipotle is more about a sort of authenticity of product and customizability of product. Chick-fil-A is doing it. It's just customer service and what they would call, I think, Southern hospitality, which is really just hospitality. And your point about it being a sort of Disneyland environment, I mean, Disney is the other sort of cultural leader is across industries about this creating customer delight experience. And there are case studies on Chick-fil-A about how they're able to pull it off. And they build that brand loyalty, which is actually the reason I think a bunch of evangelicals stood up in counter-protest is, like, okay, I do think the politics are at play, right? And evangelicals have a lot to answer about with regard to the the uh, sexual politics part of this, right? And it was definitely part of the mix. But this event, the PR crisis that this was with the donations going to anti-LGBTQ groups has happened other places. And there have been boycotts and reactions, and there have been counter boycotts and reactions, and none of them reached the national profile that Chick-fil-A did. Before, you could argue, Chick-fil-A or while Chick-fil-A was was ascending.
It was happening in the midst of their ascension, and over the last 8 years since that began, that ascension has been unbroken. Anyway, continue.
Well, my argument would be that Christian evangelicals and whatever other groups you want to tie into that's my brand name for those folks, don't step up in the counter protests in the way that they do if they don't feel strongly about the sandwich and the experience.
Yeah, I think that's true.
This doesn't have, in other words, nobody is going to come and let's say take the political and financial part of this and apply it to McDonald's, apply it to Wendy's, apply it to Chipotle, or any of the other places we look at, Jimmy John's and Papa John's, which both have in recent years some political things, right?
Yeah, sure.
That counter protest does not happen anywhere else. And the reason it happens at Chick-fil-A is because those people have literally made disciples in the marketing sense, apostles in the marketing sense, who will live and die for that sandwich.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, okay. Yes, I do. And I do think that the quality of the product, which is good, it is a good quality fast food sandwich. And also, I think more importantly, the user experience is a big part of that. I do not think that that's all it is, though. I mean, the reason that those communities came out so strongly in support of Chick-fil-A is that Chick-fil-A's public brand is very, openly Christian. That is in a way that is pretty unusual. There are other, national or regional brands that do have a sort of, an openly sort of religious aspect to them or connection to them. I'm thinking particularly of In-N-Out, the California burger chain, which is more subtle in many respects with its religious underpinnings, but does have them and actually has some interesting parallels to Chick-fil-A in terms of their service and employee sort of standards, which is interesting. But Chick-fil-A is the most sort of obvious or open about it at the scale that they exist. As I mentioned in my review, they stay closed on Sundays because it's the Sabbath, and their sort of reference to they pulled back on this a little bit in recent years, actually. But in the past, there's been a more sort of open, sort of some of the religious aspects or some religious elements have been more open in their marketing or connection to the place, like, Bible verses and whatnot being printed on various things. And that exists less, but that whole "we don't do this on Sunday" thing is a big part of their, it's an inescapable thing. And so the fact that they are this they have this public Christian identity, combined with the fact that they they have this real effort, emphasis on excellence of service and consistency, is, I think, the thing that really generates that loyalty. And in the marketplace, those are the user experience that they give is it's notable, it's remarkable. Like, if you go there, they're solicitous, they take that sort of make the customer leave happy sort of principle and apply. I mean, with small things, but I remember going to Chick-fil-A in the past with my kids, and there being some sort of issue with, oh, we didn't know that we could get an ice cream cone instead of a toy at our thing, and is it possible to trade that, even though, or not even trade it, but like, can we do this even though we didn't like do the right thing or whatever? And they were like, yeah, here, have an ice cream cone. That kind of, let's make sure these people are happy kind of thing, along with the, I can only imagine that they're trained, along with what I was going to say is, along with the sort of focus on cleanliness and just good service, I can only imagine the training regimen and the monitoring that their employees go through is very exacting, but they also pay better than a lot of other places.
This is what it comes down to for me. They do pay better. You do get better service. There is better training. And so in Fayetteville, I will say that this is true. You can drive by, right down my road is a Chick-fil-A first, and there's a Taco Bell, and there's a McDonald's. And it is always a case that you could see a line extending around the building of cars, a line of cars. And it is always true that the line at the Taco Bell and the McDonald's is long because the service is slow and inept on some level, and that the Chick-fil-A line is long because people love to eat there.
And it moves fast.
It does.
That's the other thing. Their long lines move fast. And here's something that's interesting. What's just from a sort of analysis perspective, it's striking to me that the things about Chick-fil-A that make it problematic, which is to say its support of causes that are, rooted in their religious beliefs, that are, problematic, that are uncomfortable, that are not in step with the times, at least in America, culturally, which have given them so much trouble. Those are the same principles that, at least in the company's own conception of themselves, undergird their commitment to the things that are good about them. Their sense of, offering people good service and treating employees well is, in their telling of it, rooted in, commitment to their values as dictated by their religious beliefs. So, it is sort of this fascinating thing. And, that it's the thing that distinguishes them from a McDonald's, for instance, which has always put an emphasis on efficiency, but doesn't have a driving, central belief system or values system that's rooted in anything particularly, other than sort of American capitalism. And the sense of Chick-fil-A, their sense within themselves of having a mission, of being ambassadors for a belief system, I think actually is part of what, part of the reason that they do a good job with the things that they do well. And yet, it's hard not to feel bad. Or at least it has been. It's interesting that they have really sought, after the furor in 2012, they really were like, oh, we're going to cut back and not do this anymore. And then everybody was like, oh, okay. Not everybody, a lot of people, who really care about these things and are committed to, those issues, didn't, they were like, I'll never go back to Chick-fil-A again, and I'm angry at all of you people who are continuing to go there. But most of America was like, meh, they said they stopped. But they didn't stop, really. I mean, they just stopped giving to, the companies that were like, you're gay, stop being gay. They didn't do that anymore. But corporations, organizations like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, group, which has in its rules like don't be gay. Um, they kept giving to those, and I think that they assumed that that would be uncontroversial because that wasn't the mission of it. It is in some ways an interesting sort of window into the times where organizations that were sort of uncontroversial and nobody would have given two thoughts to, 15, 20 years ago have really become beyond the pale for those reasons now. To the point where now Chick-fil-A is just like, we're done. And now if our charitable giving is entirely about fighting homelessness and making sure that people have food. And they're disassociated themselves entirely from organizations that have an overtly sort of religious, bent to them, because they're interested. They're serious about their expansion. Like their business people are smart at what they're doing, and they want to close the book on this. The question is that should customers let them close the book on it? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I know people. I know people who still visit, and I think you're right. Most of the people do it sort of apolitically. They're going for the sandwich and the experience, and not attaching the politics to it. But I do know that there are because of the political story here, people who will never darken the door, and I certainly understand that as well.
I do understand that too. It gets weirdly complicated, though. I mean, the truth is, and it comes up again and again in what we're doing here. As an industry, fast food is conservative, and in fact, most of the companies that we've talked about, like McDonald's or Hardee's / Carl's Jr., have been big contributors to the Republican Party over the years. And it does sort of beg the question, Chick-fil-A, in fact, doesn't really contribute to political parties in that same overt way as did to these organizations that one could argue tangentially had, an anti-LGBTQ position by default, at least post 2012, without that being the center of their emphasis. And is that, the question is that worse than the companies that give to an institutional party that ends up supporting those same ends, maybe in different ways, and don't really come in for criticism because of it? It's an interesting thing. Anyway, big old quagmire with the Chick-fil-A, but their sandwiches are pretty good, so there you go.
Yeah. All right, sir, we did it. Another one in the books. I will see you again soon.
Yeah, man.
Everyone out there, thank you for listening. As always, you can reach us if you want to say anything, if you want to talk sandwiches, whatever you want to do. We're here. We'd love to hear from you. Our address is ours, that's HOURS, at sweetteashakespeare.com. Reach out anytime. And until next time, see you later, man.
See ya. Thank you.